does this hurt Russia? No, not really. It hurts India, and it hurts the US-India relationship, which has been quite good under previous administration, and is now being severely damaged. And normally Trump suggests that things would happen later. Now he says today, on the 30th of July, that these high tariffs will hit on the 1st of August.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're going to be speaking to Anders Aslund, who is a senior fellow at the Stockholm Free World Forum and a former economic advisor to the Russian government between 1991 and 94 and the Ukrainian government between 1994 and 97. He's also an author of 16 books, including the book Russia's Crony Capitalism, The Path from Market Economy to Kleptocracy. We're going to be discussing, just hours ago, Trump's announcement of 25% tariffs on India, in part due to India continuing to buy Russian oil and energy. We're going to discuss what the impact will be on India's economy, on Russia's economy, and we're also going to discuss what that means for Trump's other deadline of 10 days from Tuesday of much larger tariffs on countries that are buying Russian oil still. Now, remember, you can listen to us in podcast form wherever you get your podcasts from. It's the Trump Report for Times Radio, or you can watch us on YouTube and subscribe and sign up for a membership as well. It's the Trump Report for Times Radio. Anders, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Well, just before we spoke here, Trump announced a 25% tariff on India and on Indian goods coming to the US, in large part because they are still buying Russian oil and energy. What does this mean for the conflict in Ukraine and for the Russian economy, do you think?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things here. The main thing is, of course, that Trump wants to be the first news of the world every day. And this is a way of doing so. So he goes through the world systematically in order to create top news. And India is, of course, important. So that's a good thing to hit. India has previously had quite good relations with the US, and Trump has expressed his appreciation of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But the trade between the US and India is quite small, and therefore, from the US trade perspective, India is not very important. It can be treated however Trump feels like, and the Indian commodity imports are only half of its exports to the US, but these are small numbers. It's 80 billion of Indian exports to 40 billion imports from the US. So this is really completely irrelevant to the US economy. But what Trump hits at now is that India buys cheap oil from Russia. This has generally been appreciated by the G7 because India, by and large, stays below the price ceiling that the G7 has set. So there's nothing wrong in that per se. But Trump then wants to hit India. Now he says 25% plus some undisclosed, undefined levies. So this is a big blow against Indian exports to the US. But India mainly exports services to the US. It's a very important high-tech country, and that is not touched by this at all, because well, a little bit. India now produces iPhones that will be exported to the US, but as a whole thing, this is small. But coming back to your question, Louis, I think that the issue here is Trump wants to hit against India to forget about Russia. And this a sanctions bill that has been submitted by and co-sponsored by no less than 85 US senators, headed by Lindsey Graham, is advocating 500% tariffs on Russia generally, and on countries that buy a lot from Russia. That could be, as we've discussed before, Turkey, India, and China. And there are so many issues with China, so that's not possible. Turkey is a NATO member, could hardly be sanctioned by the US, so that leaves India in a vulnerable situation. So what this amounts to is that Trump wants to alienate India rather than Russia because he likes Putin.
So in your mind then, that 25%, it's not super meaningful. I mean, we often, as you say, we'd previously heard these threats of tariffs in the hundreds. Do you think this will be having an impact in the Kremlin?
It is not against the Kremlin. It's a diversionary maneuver. Trump complains that India is buying arms, as it has done for many decades, from Russia and before that from the Soviet Union, and that it is buying oil now, which is a new development, very cheaply from Russia. The EU did something much more substantial. They sanctioned an Indian, partly state-owned, partly Russian Rosneft-owned refinery in India. And that is a much more effective measure against Russia's oil exports to India. While Trump is mainly the vanity factor and partly the diversionary factor that he does not want to go against Russia. And Trump's problem here in Washington is that there is a big majority, not only among Americans, but also among Democrats and Republicans, who want to support Ukraine. And Trump does not. So how do you manage that? If you are a populist president, you come up with all kinds of funny things. So here, as you suggested in your question, does this hurt Russia? No, not really. It hurts India, and it hurts the US-India relationship, which has been quite good under previous administration, and is now being severely damaged. And normally Trump suggests that things would happen later. Now he says today, on the 30th of July, that these high tariffs will hit on the 1st of August.
And so what sort of message do you think this does send to other nations that have been buying oil from Russia or tacitly supporting them in their invasion of Ukraine?
None. This is really US, India. As I said, it's Turkey, which is safe, being a NATO member and being in the good books of Trump. It was Turkey that made sure that Trump ended the sanctions on Syria, which I think was the right thing to do when it's a new regime. And China, where there are so many complicated issues. And it seems now that Trump is really interested in US imports of rare metals from China and magnets. And if these imports don't function from China, then the US is in big trouble. While India, you can say it has an outstanding high-tech industry, but to a considerable extent it is a supportive industry to US companies. So it's not so vital, and that will continue because that is not really touched by these tariffs, because the tariffs are on commodities, not on services.
And so, inversely, then, could this possibly weaken Putin's previous threat of these higher sanctions on nations buying oil from Russia? He reduced that deadline earlier this week on Tuesday from 30 days to about 10 days. Does this make that threat a little weaker then, if he's somewhat jumped the gun with India?
Actually, I haven't thought of it. I think they got exactly the right point there, that this looks like a preemptive measure, so that these sanctions will not come into place. And what would make sense is to impose prohibitive tariffs on US imports from Russia, which currently has very low tariffs if they are not sanctioned. The trade is very small between the US and Russia. But as I understand it, fertilizers, for example, are not sanctioned, and Russia can export fertilizers to the US without any particular tariff. And when Trump presented his so-called reciprocal tariffs, which are really unilateral, unfounded tariffs, he had nothing on a few countries. Russia and Belarus were among them.
And regardless, the relationship, especially economically, between Russia and the United States, or perhaps Trump and Putin, is getting a bit colder now compared to where it was at the start of the year. At one point, there was this offer that if Putin stopped the war in Ukraine, even just held it where it is now, the US might be interested in lifting sanctions, even signing trade deals with Russia. Do you think that's still on the cards at the moment, if it ever was in the first place?
No, I don't think so. And the reason is that there is so much opposition among the Republicans at all levels, also in Congress, against any cooperation with Putin. So not even Trump seems to be able to get away with it. He would love to do so. He has said so many nice things about Putin, from genius and on. But there are still some political blockages in the US, and this is one. But that the US would provide Ukraine with more financial aid seems quite impossible. I should not say impossible, but it seems extremely unlikely. There are people who are actually working on that, but Trump likes Putin, and he does not like Zelensky or Ukraine, as he has said so many different times.
And speaking yesterday, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova claimed that Russia is responding and taking measures to counter sanctions, even turning them to our advantage. Do you think there is any advantage for Russia in the sanctions regime that they're facing, or others for the Russian economy?
Not really. The Russian economy did quite well in the last 2 years with 4% growth. But what happened structurally was that it was the old Soviet armament companies that were revived. And these are old arms that you don't really want. And Russia is now using tanks from the 60s and 70s in Ukraine, which they have patched up a bit. This is not impressive. And this year we are seeing that the growth so far has fallen to 1.4%, so Russia, while inflation is close to 10%. So Russia is in stagflation, almost no growth, and double-digit inflation.
And so, where does that leave Russia's economy in the long run, even if they do end the war in Ukraine?
I don't think that they will end the war in Ukraine. Putin needs it. If you are a Russian president, you don't want to get 1 million men coming back from the front, uh, having been injured, and say, why did you do this to us? And many of them naturally get criminalized. PTSD. Russia has emptied its prisons. What I see from the official statistics is 160,000 Russian prisoners have been sent to the war. So it's an enormous number of prisoners who have been let free in order to fight in Ukraine. And there are almost daily stories in the Russian media about how former prisoners have killed or raped when they have come back after half a year on the front. If they survive, they can be freed. So this is a big problem, and therefore Putin does not want a peace. For him, it's better with a bad war than a good peace.
And it seems that a lot of Russia's war economy is being funded, as a lot of Russia is, through these oil and energy revenues. Um, what is the situation with Russia's energy revenues at the moment and their capability to export energy and bring in cash like that? Can that continue to support the war almost indefinitely if they don't plan on ending it?
No, the total Russian exports are down by about one third from 2022, when they were very high, to the current level. And this is mainly oil and gas exports that have declined. It used to be two-thirds of Russia's exports. Now it's down to one third or so. So this is what has really been cut. And in particular, the recent EU and the UK sanctions had a big impact on the Russian shadow fleet. It's now uh, almost 600 Russian oil tankers that have been sanctioned by the West, and even the Chinese don't want to touch these sanctioned Russian tankers, and certainly not the Indians. So this means a substantial problem. Unfortunately, one of the main oil service companies in the world, Schlumberger, is still working uh, unmitigated in Russia, not sanctioned by anybody, while its competitors, Halliburton and Baker Hughes in particular, withdrew from Russia, and Schlumberger just expanded. So this is one of the obvious big holes in the Western sanctions. But what has happened now is that it's the EU and the UK in very good coordination that are taking over from the US, and for the Russian economy are far more important than the US.
And we mentioned before Trump's, less than positive view of Ukraine and their leader Zelensky, but U.S. support, despite a few pauses, hasn't stopped for Ukraine yet. That's going to make the situation a lot more difficult for Russia, isn't it? When they might have hoped that all support will have just stopped for Ukraine.
Yeah, there is still old US support that was granted by Biden that is coming through. In particular, it's $20 billion that Biden's people smartly passed on to a trust fund at the World Bank in December last year, that is now gradually dispersed quietly. But in the arms area, the US and Trump really have a dilemma. If you're not in Ukraine, you're not serious as an arms producer. And the Trump's blockage of arms support for Ukraine effectively cuts out the US companies from Ukraine. So therefore, he tried to find a compromise that NATO buys US arms and delivers to Ukraine, so that the big US arms producers have some role. US arms exports are very important. It was more than $300 billion last year. And I'm sitting in Washington. All the five big arms producers have now established their headquarters in this town because they live on the US government and are an important influence. And they want to sell their arms to Ukraine, which the Europeans, in particular the French now, wants to block to the advantage of European arms producers. So this is a big and interesting battle going on.
And as you say, there is that significant pressure from those arms producers, but also from politicians and a lot of people across the United States for Trump not to just let Putin roll through Ukraine to take what he wants. Um, how much of an issue is that now for Putin if that almost Trump lifeline for the Russian economy and their ambitions in Ukraine is effectively gone? Because as much as Trump likes to command from the top, he can't go ahead with this without support from his party and the American people.
Indeed, this is really one of a few clear restrictions on Trump's behavior that we are seeing. The US support for Ukraine, it's 60 plus percent. So it's very strong. And if we take the arms producers, they have cleverly located their production facilities all over the country. So they have an enormous influence in the Congress, and they are not shy to use it, while they are very shy not to criticize any US government, because they are always in favor of selling arms to the US government. So the US arms producers is one of these big silent lobbying groups.
Well, Anders Aslund, thank you very much for speaking with me today on the Trump Report.
Thank you very much.